to make the Cozette Bikini. The link to purchase this pattern is in the description below, and it will take you to my Etsy shop, Alli's Patterns. Now to make this swimsuit, you're going to need 4-way stretch swimwear fabric. The lining is optional, the elastic is optional. Everything honestly just depends on the characteristics of your fabric, but keep in mind elastic will really help keep that fabric molded and tight against your body, whether it's wet or dry. Now, there are 2 different ways you can sew this bikini together. There is the serge and turn method, which I would recommend if you're a beginner, and you can do this whether or not you have a serger. And then there's the reversible method. Now, there are also written instructions included in the pattern download that you can follow along with. So after you've printed out your pattern and all the instructions, pin it to your fabric and cut it out, and we're ready to begin. The first method we are going to go over is the serge and turn method, and we're going to start off with the bikini bottom. For step 1, you're going to transfer all of the markings and notches from the pattern onto your fabric. Once you have everything cut out, you're going to take the 2 side bottom pieces and you're going to do some accent top stitching. Here I have footage of me doing this on the white one, because whether you do the reversible swimsuit or the serge and turn, this step is exactly the same. This top stitching is optional, but I encourage you to take the time to do this because obviously it's gorgeous, but it's also a great warm-up. The next step is sewing the side seams of these 2 side pieces to the back piece, right sides together. For this method, I just use a regular straight stitch for all of my seams, and then I serge off any excess, which provides each of my seams with a little bit more strength, and I can have peace of mind knowing that none of my seams are going to pop open. If you don't have a serger, you can either use a twin needle to sew a double line, or you can use a narrow zigzag stitch for the actual seam and any seam finishes. Next, you're going to sew the side seams of that front piece to the 2 side pieces, right sides together. When sewing swimwear, I recommend using a lot of pins because the fabric can be quite slippery. After I was done stitching the side seams, I serged off the excess, and then on the front and back pieces where we just sewed all of those seams, I top stitched them down towards center front and center back. This is optional, but it keeps that seam nice and flat and prevents any distortions from happening. Next, we are going to sew the crotch piece to the front piece, right sides together, matching notches. Now, if you have really thin fabric like I did, I would recommend layering another piece of lining fabric on top of this, sandwiching the exterior fabric in between. After I sewed this seam, I did serge it for extra durability. If you don't have a serger, I would recommend doing another row of stitching. Now you're going to sew the back crotch to the bottom of the back piece. Then I want you to mark the center of each of these pieces and then work your way outwards with the pins so that it's all perfectly aligned and there's no pulling or tension in either direction. And then sew the seam, serge it, and press. For step 8, we're going to construct the lining by repeating all of the steps that we just did, except for any of that accent top stitching. Then I serged and trimmed down all of my seam allowance after I used my single needle to do a straight stitch. Again, this is optional, but it's important to have strong seams on a swimsuit. For step 9, you're going to put the lining inside of the shell, wrong sides together, and pin all the way around the leg opening and the waist opening so that you can sew a basting stitch 1/4 inch from the edge from each opening to hold it in place. The reason I just did a basting stitch is because I was planning on serging all of these edges. If you are not using a serger, then make sure you shorten the stitch length so that it really holds those pieces together, and then do a zigzag stitch to finish that raw edge. If you don't have a zigzag stitch, then you'll be doing a double 1/4 inch roll around the elastic on the leg openings to finish off the raw edge. For step 10, I want you to pin the elastic all the way around the leg opening without stretching it, and then take one end and pin it so it's overlaying the other end about 3/4 to 1 inch, depending on how tight you want it to be. Next, you're going to evenly distribute the stretch across the entire leg opening. The elastic around the leg opening is optional, and I say that because it honestly just depends on your fabric. Next, we are going to fold the edge of the fabric on top of the elastic and top stitch 1/4 inch from that folded edge so that the needle is piercing through that elastic and securing that even distribution of stretch. And this is what it should look like when you're all finished. Next, we are going to be attaching the elastic to the waistline. To determine the length of elastic you need, wrap it around the entire waist of the swimsuit and then just overlap it 1/2 inch on either end. And then evenly distribute that stretch and pin it in place. Next, fold the top of the waistline down 1/2 inch on top of that elastic and sew it down. You should have your needle go through the elastic to secure the stretch in the intended areas you choose. If you do not catch the elastic, then it will be more like a casing and the ease and gathering will shift irregularly. During this step, be careful not to pull the fabric when you're stretching the elastic. And now you should be all finished with the serge and turn method for the Cozette Bikini bottom. Now I will teach you how to do the serge and turn method for the Cozette Bikini top. Now, if you want to save paper, you can cut the straps to the dimensions written in my instructions, or you can use the pattern pieces I provided. You will then fold each strap in half and sew across the top and then all the way down the vertical length. Step 3 is turning the straps inside out. There will be a lot of tension during this step, so if you hear any stitches popping, stop immediately, turn them inside out again, and re-stitch where those threads broke. For step 4, I want you to top stitch 3 to 4 rows of accent stitches 1/4 inch apart all the way down the vertical length of your straps. But if you don't want to do this, at the very least, sew super close to the edge on each side so that they will hold a flat shape and not relax into a tube. For step 5, we will be sewing the side seams of the bikini top. Make sure you transfer those markings from the pattern onto your fabric. Then place right sides together and sew a 1/2 inch seam on either side, and then repeat this step for the lining. And if you want to do some top stitching on the side seams for the shell, now is the time to do so. Next, take the shell of your bikini top and spread it open so that you're looking at the right side, and align the raw edge of each strap to those markings you made and secure them with a pin. Next, place the right side of the lining to the right side of the bandeau, sandwiching those straps in between so that they are coming out the bottom opening of the bikini top. You will then sew a 1/4 inch seam all the way around the top of the bandeau, joining all those layers together. After you're done doing this, trim off any excess bulk or uneven edges so you have a really clean line when you flip it right side out. For step 8, we will be adding elastic around the top of the bikini. To get the proper length, grab a measuring tape and measure around your upper bust. Then, when you're sewing it together, overlap each end about 1 inch to get a negative amount of ease so that elastic is nice and tight. After you get the proper length, distribute the stretch evenly and pin it in place. But when you're pinning, make sure that you're only attaching the elastic through the seam allowance and the lining. Because when you flip this right sides out again, you want that stitch to be hidden. Because eventually, we will top stitch around the entire thing, and I don't want 2 rows of stitching because it will just look really messy. So it should look something like this. For step 9, we will be sewing down center back. What I want you to do is spread open the lining and the shell so that right sides are together, and you'll only be sewing through 2 layers at a time all the way down center back. Now it's really important that when it changes from shell to lining, the seams are perfectly aligned. For step 10, you're going to top stitch all the way around the top of the bikini 1/4 inch from the edge. If you need, use some pins to keep the shell and the lining from shifting. For step 11, you're going to sew a basting stitch 1/4 inch from the edge all the way around the bottom of the bikini top, joining the lining and the shell together. After that, finish the raw edge by using a serger or a zigzag stitch. For step 12, we will be attaching elastic to the lower half of the bikini top. To get the length that you need, measure directly under your bust and stretch the elastic to the desired tightness you want. Just make sure to leave a 1/2 inch on either end so that you can overlap the elastic on the bandeau. Then pin the elastic to the bikini, evenly distributing that stretch. After that, you'll be turning it up and stitching 1/4 inch from the folded edge, securing everything in place. And now you're all finished with the serge and turn method for the Cozette Bikini. Now I will be teaching you the reversible, or in other words, the seamless method for the bikini bottom. For my example, I will be using swimsuit lining fabric for my reverse side because my white fabric was extremely thick, but it's really intended to be reversible so that you can have 2 swimsuits in one. The first step is to top stitch several lines 1/4 inch apart on the sides of the bikini bottoms from one end to the other. Now this is completely for aesthetic purposes only, so it's definitely not required, but it's one of the signature characteristics of my Cozette collection, so I really encourage you to do it because I think it's gorgeous. And it's actually quite soothing to just sew a bunch of straight lines. Anyways, this is what it should look like after you're all finished. Step 2, you will be sewing the side seams of both side pieces to the front piece, matching the notches right sides together. Then do this again for your interior fabric, or in my case, the lining. For step 3, we are going to be joining the lining and the shell along the leg curve. First, put right sides together and then sew along that leg curve 1/4 inch from the edge, but do not sew across the bottom of the crotch. As you can see here, I did not sew across the crotch, I am only sewing along the curve of the leg opening. For step 4, you will attach the crotch to the back piece and sew along the leg curve. Now, in my tutorial, I accidentally forgot to sew the crotch piece to the back before this step. So before you do what I'm showing right here, take the crotch piece of the lining and sew it to the right side of the lining, and then take the crotch piece of the shell and sew that to the right side of the shell. And then after that, you'll do the same exact thing that we did in the previous step and sew along those leg openings, but not sewing across the bottom of the crotch. For step 5, we'll be sewing down center back. You're going to open up the bikini bottom by folding down the interior from the exterior, or in my case, the lining from the shell, so that they're separated and it becomes one single layer. Then pin one side seam of the back piece to one of the side seam pieces, right sides together, and then sew down from the top of the shell to the top of the lining in one single stitching line. And when you do this, make sure that the seams are perfectly aligned when it changes from shell to lining. And before you sew the other side seam, if you wish to add elastic to the leg holes of the reversible bikini bottom, then now is the time to do so. I would personally approach this by sewing the elastic to just one of the layers so that I could keep it open and see what I was doing as I was distributing all of that tension. But you could easily sandwich it and anchor it to both the inside and the outside if you wish. Just make sure you do it before you close that other side seam. And then press everything once you're done. After that, we are then going to pull the lining out of the bottom and then fold both pieces of that lining under the two pieces of the shell. It might take you a little bit of playing around with this to get it right, but the inside of the front crotch should be on the inside of the back crotch, and it should look something like this. After you get that situated, you're going to take the outside of one of the lining pieces and then the outside of one of the shell pieces, sandwiching in one of each in the middle, and then you're going to pin right sides together and sew as far as you can across the top. You'll probably end up stopping somewhere in the middle of each of the side bottom pieces. After you're done, it should look something like this. Then you will turn it back right side out through the larger crotch opening on the back. Then you'll take everything and turn it inside out through the front smaller crotch opening and sew the other side of that waistline, sandwiching in one of each in the middle and sewing the lining layer to the right side of the shell layer. Pin everything in place so that it doesn't shift, and then you'll sew across the top exactly how you did before, but this time make sure you overlap your stitch on both ends of your previous stitch line, which will complete the seam around the waistline and encase all of those raw edges. After you're done with that, turn it right side out again through the small opening of the crotch and press. Now, what you see here is me backpedaling and attaching those two crotch pieces that I forgot to do in step 4. But I'm not trying to hide the fact that I make mistakes while sewing as well. So here you can see me fixing that problem. Now onto step 7, which is sewing together the front crotch to the back crotch. Sadly, you have to unpick about 2 to 3 inches of that beautiful waistline that you just sewed and use 2 fingers to reach all the way to the bottom and grab both crotch ends and pull it through the top. You will then pin right sides together and sew all the way around, shifting the fabric beneath the presser foot and twisting it as you go along. Just make sure that when it switches from lining to shell, that the seams are lined up perfectly. And when you turn it right sides out, it should look something like this. Now, before you close off that hole that you just unpicked, you will create a casing for the elastic by sewing 1/2 inch from the edge all the way around. Then you'll take your elastic with the safety pin and thread it through that casing that you just created, making sure that you're not twisting it and you're keeping it straight. Also make sure not to accidentally pull the other end all the way through, because then you will overlap both elastic ends on top of each other and secure it with thread. Finally, the last step is sewing that hole that you unpicked shut and then top stitching all the way around the top so that you can secure that even distribution of stretch from the elastic. All you have to do is align that folded edge on the inside of your presser foot and stitch down. Now we will be going over the reversible method for the bikini top. The first step is cutting out your fabric and making all of those markings. The second step is folding the straps in half and sewing them together across the top and then down the vertical length. If you don't have a serger, I would recommend doing 2 rows of stitching on your single needle or a zigzag stitch, because there will be a lot of tension when you're turning that strap inside out, which is the next step. I really recommend using a strap turner for this step, but if you don't have one, there are a few tricks out there that you can do. Step 4 is accent stitches. Just start from the edge so that you can get a straight line and then use your presser foot as a guide. Depending on the width you chose for your strap, you'll probably be able to get 3 to 4 rows of stitching. Don't stress if it's not perfect, no one's really going to notice. Just do your best. For step 5, you're going to be sewing the side seams of the 2 back pieces to the side seams of the front piece, and then repeat this step for the interior, or in my case, the lining. Once you're finished, it should look something like this. For step 6, you're going to put right sides together by folding it in half, and then you're going to sew down center back. Do this on the shell fabric and your interior/lining. And then just take a second to make sure you transferred all of those markings from the pattern onto your fabric. For step 7, you're going to place the lining inside of the shell so that right sides are together, and then use a few pins to keep the seams aligned. After that, for step 8, we will be sliding the straps through the bottom opening in between the lining and the shell. Make sure that you're pinning that raw edge to the seam and sandwiching it in between, matching them to the dots that you transferred from the pattern. The excess length from the strap should be exiting out the bottom of the bikini. It should not be coming out the top. After you're done pinning all of that together, you will then sew a 1/4 inch seam all the way around. If you want to add some extra durability for where your straps are attached, you can sew a second row. Trim down any unevenness and bulk from the seam allowance so that it folds over nice and flat. And then, if you're planning on using elastic, make sure that you're sewing it to just one of those layers below that stitching line on the wrong side. I decided not to do elastic because I was using a very firm and supportive fabric. After you're done, turn it right sides out again and it should look something like this. For step 9, we will be sewing the bottom of the bikini closed. To do this, unpick 2 to 3 inches from the seam that you just created around the top of the bikini, and then grab the bottom layers from the bandeau by putting your fingers through and pulling them back up through the hole so that you can sew them right sides together. You will really have to manhandle these layers as you sew them underneath the presser foot and twist as you go, which can be a little bit tricky, but if your fabric is thin, it shouldn't be too difficult. After you're finished sewing, you're going to turn it right sides out again through that hole that you created, and it should look something like this. Your bikini is starting to look really beautiful at this stage, so I hope you're getting excited because you only have 2 steps left. For step 10, you're going to hand stitch the hole that you unpicked and use the needle holes as a guide as you go along to help make it look really clean and professional. You want to make it look like you had never unpicked that hole, and make sure you overlap the stitches a little bit, even where they aren't unpicked, so that it's very strong and secure. When you're sewing knits, you can get a special needle for your machine that has a more rounded tip so that it's not tearing through the fabric. So if you're a beginner and you unpick things a little bit more, then I would consider getting a stretch needle for this project. The last step is top stitching around the bottom and the top of the bikini to keep those layers from peeking out from underneath each other. I decided to sew mine 1/4 inch from the edge, but you could also do this super close to the edge by using the inside of your presser foot as a guide. And now you are all finished with the reversible method for the Cozette Bikini. I hope you guys liked this tutorial. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments below, and good luck with this project. I can't wait to see what you guys make.